right. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, hello and welcome to the Free Press Live! Coming to you from the Free Press newsroom here in Midtown Manhattan. I'm Michael Moynihan, and back with me finally after her lazy week last week is opinion editor at Newsweek, Batya Ungar-Sargon. And we have a great show for you today, Batya. It is, America's about to collapse into fascism. So what are we going to talk about before everything ends and we all end up in camps? Well, despite that, Frannie Block will be here to talk about the debate over school choice. It has people crossing party lines in Kentucky. And the great Jay Solomon, who is now with us here at the Free Press, is going to break down his reporting on a demoted senior Pentagon official with alleged ties to Iran, raising questions about the Biden administration's vetting process. And Batya and I are going to do the thing that we always do, which is check in with the legacy press, i.e. the people who aren't us and the people who get paid and work in big newspapers and stuff. And we have some very funny and interesting and weirdo bits from CNN and the Washington Post this week because, as always, they are covering themselves in glory. But first, there is a presidential race, and thankfully it will all be over next week. Batya, where are we? God.
We are officially in endgame.
Yes.
We are now less than 1 week out from the election. Over the weekend, Trump held a rally at Madison Square Garden, and yesterday morning he spoke to the press at Mar-a-Lago, where he focused on illegal immigration. Let's take a look at a few clips.
I know we talk about inflation and the economy, but to me, there's nothing more important than the fabric of our country being destroyed by people placed there, violently placed there, as far as I'm concerned, foolishly, stupidly placed there. I think what's happening on the border is the single biggest issue.
And last night, Kamala Harris gave a speech that's being referred to as her closing argument in Washington, D.C. There was a lot of time devoted to casting Trump as an evil and divisive threat to democracy. She did talk about policy for a few minutes, specifically price controls. She mentioned that, and she mentioned a few of the other things that she had been promising, did not go into detail. Here is the extent of her policy proposals from that speech.
Enact the first ever federal ban on price gouging on groceries. Cap the price of insulin and limit out-of-pocket prescription costs for all Americans. I will fight to make sure that hardworking Americans can actually afford a place to live. And as president, I will fight to help first-time home buyers with your down payment, take on the companies that are jacking up rents, and build millions of new homes.
Okay, Michael. So here's my take on closing. I watched both speeches in their entirety, and almost everything that Kamala Harris says about Donald Trump is not true. She accuses him of wanting to implement an abortion ban, which he has promised to veto. She accused him of implementing already Trump abortion bans in which there are states where there are no exceptions for incest and rape. That's false. She accuses him of wanting to eliminate Social Security. He has promised to protect it. And she accuses him of wanting to implement a 20% tax on imported goods. That's not how tariffs work. Meanwhile, everything that Trump says about Kamala Harris is true. She was the border czar. She did say that aliens in detention should get trans surgeries. She was part of the administration that oversaw record inflation. She oversaw a coup against Biden. She lied about Biden's mental fitness, and she was part of the disastrous foreign policy of the Biden administration. And I think the most important question for people who are still undecided, who are very upset about the foreign policy disasters and are very upset about immigration is, do you think Kamala Harris is going to fire Alejandro Mayorkas and Tony Blinken? Of course she's not, which means we're going to have 4 more years of the same thing. And I think that what we're really seeing here is an election between people with real problems and an election between people with fake problems. Donald Trump is representing the real struggles of downwardly mobile working class men. And Kamala Harris is representing a made-up struggle, an abortion ban, which will never happen, to make rich women feel like they are part of an oppressed category. And that is my final take on the end game here, Michael, which is that the side that is lying is the side that is losing.
So this is your final argument.
This is my final argument.
Final argument, none of which surprised me at all. I will say one thing. I mean, I disagree with some of the stuff, and let's not get bogged down in those details. But I will say this, is that, campaigns can really make your head spin in the sense that when you see people, and I've seen this a lot, and to your point, I've seen this a lot on the Harris side, saying things that they know aren't true. I mean, people that are journalists, I mean, I saw a journalist from the Washington Post retweeting something about someone at the MSG rally who said that we need to slaughter our opponents. And I said, well, good Lord, I can't believe that they're saying that. And no one's been talking about this. And of course, you look at it and it's like people of my generation, when you talk about sports, you say, oh, they slaughtered the other team, right? And it was just like, we're going to win, there's going to be a landslide, we're going to slaughter them. And it's like, wait, you're with the Washington Post. And at this point, we've all gone so mad that we're taking these things out of context because it doesn't really matter. It's all about vibes in a way, not just the Kamala Harris vibes, but the vibes about Trump. This is something that his people would say, right? And that's the same thing when you see things like, a comment that Trump made that has been repeated ad infinitum about I think it was about cars coming in from Mexico.
The auto industry. He said that
it was the bloodbath.
He said if we allow China to build car manufacturing plants in Mexico, then there will be a bloodbath. And of course, he was talking about the auto industry specifically, which is, might I say, completely accurate.
Yeah, well, I mean, I disagree with that. But the thing about it is
it was reported as...
it's funny because we're in this era of hyper-polarization and hyper-partisanship. And we apparently talk about that in tone gravely about it. We need to get beyond this. Yet we see the conversation that we're having about this race, particularly like dictator on day one. Nobody's going to stop talking about it. If you see that in context, it's a dumb comment that is essentially saying, and nothing, by the way, he says is dictatorial. He's like, I'm going to do signing statements and executive actions on the first day, which since George W. Bush, which really we've had this for a long time, but he really inaugurated that new era of the power of the presidency and people doing that. Trump has done it, Biden did it, and Obama too. But it's an incredible thing that people say, can't really skate by this. I mean, this was in the conversation with Anderson Cooper, this town hall. She said a million of these things. Nobody stopped her and said, well, not the bloodbath thing. I don't think it was that one. But there's a number of these things always. So, if you have any faith in the mainstream media still, which I don't know why you'd be watching this if you do. You should be watching those dumb things on CBS, ABC, CNN. But you see the way these things are abused. And it's like the second, obviously Donald Trump gives them so many opportunities. He's endless with these opportunities. And I just saw the MSG rally was another version of this. To me, this was another one of, he's like Bob Dylan. He never stops touring. He's out there, even when he's president, he was doing rallies. And there's another one of those. But this desperation in this last week, it was a Nazi rally, right? It was a very, very funny, and I advise people to go look at those old downfall memes, Hitler and the thing. The funniest one I've seen is like people, this is a great one, look this up, where there's all these Jews at the rally flying. It's like, this is a Nazi rally and this is what it's going to look like in 2023. But yeah, I think this whole process has been so depressing. And I take this separately from the politics of it all, from whether we're going to end up with a Donald Trump presidency or a Kamala Harris presidency. I just watching this broken process of people telling us that they're out there on our side combating misinformation while spewing things that aren't true. This is something that is really dispiriting to a lot of voters and a lot of people in our business too. I have talked to people who are saying like, really, who the fuck do I believe at this point? Because all these things that are said about either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, I think less so about Kamala Harris for one reason. And I'll finish on this thing because, Donald Trump says she's a communist. She's not a communist. Come on, stop it. That's ridiculous. But there isn't a chorus of people within the mainstream media and a chorus of people within mainstream politics backing up this claim, right? There isn't. You're not going to find that in the New York Times. You're not going to find that in the Wall Street Journal. Maybe there'll be some people on OAN or some of these networks. But when you have this idea that 65, 75 million people last time around are voting for a Nazi, are voting for a fascist. I mean, really? We're at this point? And that's something that's being echoed by the New York Times and being echoed by mainstream media, MSNBC, CNN. And then to end it all, Joe Biden says, your voters are garbage, right? I mean, that is literally deplorables 2.0. It's just the whole tone of this election disgusts me in a lot of ways.
So there are 2 points I want to make. I think you raised something really important and interesting, which is that the powers that be, the institutions in America, have proven very good at standing up to Donald Trump's abuses of power, alleged abuses of power, desires to abuse power, right? Mm-hmm. They have proven very bad at standing up to the Democrats' attempts to abuse power. In fact, they have been their handmaidens in doing so. And so for people who feel worried about what Donald Trump will do with power, I would say it is in the nature of power not to give up more power, not to give it back to the people, but to try to consolidate power. And look at who our institutions have proven good at standing up to and who they have not done so. On the second point you made, I think this is so important. Barack Obama keeps getting up there and saying, Donald Trump is an authoritarian, he is a threat to our democracy, he is the worst person, he is a racist, right? Which, as you say, implies that all of his voters are completely comfortable with that. And then he said, Obama goes, why is everything so divisive? Why can't we come together? Do you think you're playing a role in it, in calling half of the country willing to vote for a Nazi? And I think Kamala Harris has stepped into the same thing. She says, to her credit, she says, I want to be the president of everyone.
She did that last night.
I want to unite. She did this last night.
Yeah.
It's great that she says that. But then she goes on to demonize the half of the country that doesn't want to vote for her. And I think that this is so crucial and so important. It's such a great point that you made.
Yeah, no, I thought that last night, watching that rally, it's eye-glazing, because they always are. It's just a repetition of all the tropes that one would expect. But the fact that she did do that, I thought that's not something Donald Trump ever does. It's something that she did do because if she were to win the presidency, and by the way, I think this is a real coin toss.
That's actually not true. Trump has said that he wants to be the president for everybody.
I think his rhetoric is a lot sharper. I think that's pretty obvious in a lot of ways. But I think that with her last night just saying that, and again, I think this is really a coin toss election. I think that the Trump people are getting a little too over their skis in this and being very, very excited about this. This could turn in any direction at any time, but if she does win this election, this is going to be a restive population of 75 million people, and she has to be, the leader of all those people, and I'm not sure that she can do that at this point, so.
Because of her rhetoric around.
Yeah, look, the thing that's so frustrating about it is we expect a certain level of sharp rhetoric in politics, and we always say, and I kind of, we throw, it's a sort of tossed off comment, that we shouldn't be talking like this. This shouldn't be the way that politics is handled in America. I'm not so sure about that, but we have gotten to a point where it is so crazy, the Bush-Hitler stuff. And if you're old enough like me to remember those times when George Bush was, marching his SA troops through Manhattan in these protests with the war and stuff, that was not something that you saw within the mainstream. It just wasn't. It was something that protesters held up. They would take a bit of electrical tape and put a little mustache on Bush and be like, har, har. It was the fact that it's really seeped into the mainstream. And it's not to say that Donald Trump isn't a uniquely divisive figure, and I cannot stand a lot of the rhetoric. I think it is completely out of bounds, saying that CBS should be shut down, their license should be taken away because he didn't like a debate. That stuff is really terrifying to me. But at the same time, there is a special place that we hold for things like Nazism, for the Holocaust, saying we put in camps. This stuff, I think, has gone way too far. And because certain people want to win an election, and they think the way of doing that is scaring people, that we have minimized the impact of these words. And then all of a sudden, my question is, if these people at MSG for the rally are handmaidens to Nazism, if Donald Trump himself is a Nazi, what do we call actual Nazis? Super Nazis? Very, very, very Nazi types? The ones with the armbands, the ones that actively, deny the Holocaust, hate Jews, they deny the Holocaust, but they wish it happened, that sort of thing. What do we call them? I think the inflation of this rhetoric has had a really destructive, and look, I know people who complain about this. Donald Trump has been involved in this himself. I think the rhetoric that, we see him on Andrew Schultz's show, and Andrew Schultz is comedian, and the guy Akash with him says at the end, can you kind of dial down the rhetoric? And I thought that question was right. I was like, just for a bit, can we realize that we're in this kind of toxic phase of American politics? Can you do us a favor and not involve yourself? He finds it impossible. But anyway.
Well, it was very interesting because the press conference he had yesterday was in tone very different from the Madison Square Garden.
It actually was, yeah.
It almost like it was a corrective. I think, he also then later went on Sean Hannity and he apologized basically for the stand-up comic and the joke about Puerto Rico that offended so many people. You could tell that he was really rattled by that and felt like, well, we're doing so well with Hispanic voters, which they are, because Hispanic voters, of course, don't see themselves as united by race. They see themselves as Americans and American citizens. I do think, I've been thinking about this a lot, I do think that a party that cared more about Jews would not be so fast and so quick to call everybody a Nazi, because that means something to us. Like that, the Nazis did one really, really, really bad thing, right? They did a lot of bad things, but one of them is the thing that made them Nazis. And it's the thing that, is why I only have half of a family. And I think there's something there that, I know that a lot of Jews still are voting for Democrats. I know that they don't feel the same way as me about this, but it does seem like almost,
But if you want to find people in the streets of Manhattan shouting about Jews, you wouldn't have found it in front of MSG the other day, but I have seen it, and I've seen it recently, and they weren't Trump supporters.
Right.
So,
Fair enough. Okay. Up next, we have Frannie Block joining us to talk about how the issue of school choice is playing out in Kentucky. But first, take a look at this. Michael and I are going to be covering election night live with Barry Weiss and an all-star lineup of guests. You're not going to want to miss this. We will be right back.
What are you doing on election night? Yes, I'm talking about the election night from hell. You don't have plans? Don't worry about it, because I have a plan for you. Watch Election Night 2024 with who else? The Free Press. Joining us from our live party in Manhattan is an incredible lineup of guests. It's everyone from Frank Luntz and Frank Bruni to Michael Schellenberger, Coleman Hughes, the girls from Red Scare, the boys from The Fifth Column, Anna Kasparian, Konstantin Kisin, John McWhorter, Andrew Yang, Richie Torres, Ben Domenech, and so many more. It's hosted by who else? Michael Moynihan, Batya Ungar-Sargon, and yours truly. You know what you're going to get on Fox or MSNBC. So if you want independent thinking, tune into the Free Press for our live election coverage on November 5th, starting at 7 p.m. until whenever they call it. Throw a party, grab some friends, and watch history unfold with us. We'll see you there.
We're like all, mostly grown up, and we're like, this sucks.
Yeah.
Last decade or so has kind of sucked.
No wonder suicide rates are so high. No wonder people are so depressed. There's nothing to live for. There's nothing to fight for. And rightfully so. All of our foreign wars are for big corporations and elites who do not give a damn about America.
Jackie, you're an ambitious woman. You're a business owner.
Yeah, you
own a nonprofit. You're the CEO.
Well, she's had to.
How
but I've
are you
had
saying
to.
that Jackie isn't
survival.
driven?
This is actually for survival.
Because she was
so I didn't
driven
want
to do
this.
so.
I didn't want to do this.
In an ideal world,
I would be married with children in an ideal world.
Do you still love your country?
I love to be an American.
Stella?
Love being an American.
So why are you saying that this system perpetuates hating America?
I'll let you cook.
All right, Frannie Block, as promised, is here with us to talk about her latest story on the Democrats fighting for school choice in Kentucky. Frannie, thanks for joining us. Very good story. The weird thing about that lead-in is Democrats fighting for school choice. I don't recall that happening very much, although I did live in D.C. at a time when Michelle Rhee was the head of schools there, and she was a Democrat, and that caused a huge tumult. What is going on in Kentucky?
So I think Kentucky is kind of a part of what the Free Press has reported on a lot, which is this idea of the Great Scramble. And so school choice is a policy across the country that has been championed by conservatives. But when you go into a state like Kentucky, what you see is that in urban areas where the school districts, the public schools, are not very good and they're particularly impacting Black families and poor families, those are the people that want school choice, and those are people that are historically Democrats. Meanwhile, if you go into rural areas in Kentucky and you talk to superintendents like I did, who, that is Trump country. The one county I went to, 85% of people voted for Trump in the last election, yet many people don't want school choice. They say, our schools are good, please leave the funding alone, don't mess with it, we don't want to lose any funding because it's going to be siphoned away to private schools in the urban areas.
And their schools might, in fact, be good, right? But the issue is not that. I mean, when you looked at this, and I'm putting you on the spot here, you might not know this, but what is the breakdown of support amongst certain minority groups, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, for school choice? Because that in the past was always the beginning of the scramble for me, because you saw the teachers unions really hating this stuff, these Democratic areas saying, no, school choice here. But then you polled people in Black neighborhoods and they were like, our schools are terrible. You mean we can get portable money and have great educations like these white people? And they were really supportive. I mean, what did you find when you were looking at that, that scramble as it is? Like, the support is there amongst certain minority groups, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. There's actually no polling in Kentucky about this ballot measure, which I found really strange considering it's a super contentious issue and probably one of the biggest issues on the ballot for Kentucky this November. But when you poll kind of the United States as a whole, you do start to see that not just Republicans, but Democrats and independents also overwhelmingly support the idea of school choice.
Really?
So it is not, I wrote another story a few weeks ago about this trend in Florida popping up of microschooling, kind of this return to the one-room schoolhouse. And again, people supported school choice so that they could enroll their kids in these micro schools. And that was regardless of where they fell ideologically or politically.
Did you find any kind of consistent breakdown in the people that you spoke to of how people would fall on this measure? Because I think what Michael's pointing to is it's something I've obviously encountered here in New York. Our public school system in New York City is more segregated than Alabama's. Did you guys know that?
Wow.
And we spend so much money per kid, and so many of the kids in public schools who are getting a good education are white or Asian or in these sort of specialized schools, and so many of the Black and Hispanic kids are getting just a terrible education despite the fact that we spend, I think, the highest amount per child. But then when you talk, exactly like you said, Michael, you go into poor communities, Black parents want choice for their kids, but then you have this sort of white progressive movement putting the kibosh on that and saying, no, all the money is to stay in the public schools, right, out of this kind of virtue signal. Did you find any consistent breakdown in the people that you spoke to that would predict one way or the other?
I mean, it's a great point. I think at the end of the day, when I was in Louisville in the West End, which is the poorest neighborhood in Louisville, the parents I spoke to there, those were the parents that were saying, I'm putting my kids in these private schools to save them. I want school choice to save my kids because otherwise I don't know what's going to happen to them in the public schools and I'm worried for them. Again, when I went then into the rural counties, I'm talking to people who are working in the school district. Those are people that are worried about losing their jobs, people who are worried about their friends losing their jobs. And so then I think that puts an entirely different perspective on the issue as well. And then when I went and talked to the head of the teachers union in Kentucky, obviously he's against school choice. They can send their kids to private schools. I think what he left out of that is that only if they can afford it.
Right. And how are the public schools in Kentucky? Are they?
So Kentucky ranks, I think, about 29th in the state. So they're not the worst, they're not the best. But what I will say is that in Jefferson County, which is where Louisville is, the majority, the state recently released its test scores, and they kind of gave the top 10 and the top worst in elementary, middle, and high school. And the majority of the worst schools were all in Jefferson County, all in the poorest neighborhoods of Louisville. So there clearly is a divide, and the schools in Louisville and in the urban counties are struggling more than those rural schools are. On the other side of that, I went to Rockcastle County, a rural county. Their elementary school was the second best elementary school in the state. And so I think there's a lot of different factors as to why that is. There's been a lot of research about, for example, two-parent households being a big impact on that, perhaps teachers unions having an impact on that in the cities versus in rural counties. So there's a lot of different theories, but that is what's happening.
I want to point something out here to the comment from the union official that you spoke to. This is especially bad in Chicago. If you look at what's going on in Chicago, there's a bunch of great reporting on this. There's a great documentary about this too, about how the teachers' unions have kind of, control politics in Chicago in a lot of ways. The head of the union, and I just have to look up her name, Stacey Davis Gates, who has said that school choice is for racists. This is what she said, quote, for racists. Was revealed to send her child to a private school. That was revealed last year, unsurprising. And she said, well, the circumstances, not for thee, but for me, kind of thing. And when somebody says that, you do have a choice. The head of the teachers union in Chicago has a bit of money in her pocket and can do this. And that desire is there for all of these parents to do so. When you talk to people in the union, what is the general union argument? So for people who don't understand this, you say well, that just seems like a logical, natural thing. Allow these kids, particularly poor kids, who get the worst education in the worst areas, why wouldn't we allow them to do that? What is the teachers' union argument that we shouldn't be doing that?
So the teachers' union states that the pot, basically the money for education in Kentucky, is only so big. And when you do look at states that have passed very comprehensive school choice plans like Florida, you do tend to see that the majority of people receiving money from the state, whether you want to call it a voucher or not, are people that were already enrolled in private schools to begin with. So the idea that the teachers union is saying is, listen, if the pot is only so big, there's going to be people that are not being educated by the public schools right now that are now going to be draining money from the public schools anyway. And so that is the argument, again, that I also got when I went to the rural counties, is essentially they're saying, we're going to lose money. Our budget is going to lose money. And there's a progressive think tank in Kentucky that's put out a study saying that they're going to lose like $60 million or something really crazy. Or I can't even remember the number, but it would account to at least 60 jobs being lost in the county is the projection. And they're saying that money is basically going to go towards vouchers or whatever you want to call it for students that are already enrolled in private schools in Lexington and in Louisville. Yeah. And so that's their argument.
I want to say that there is a progressive argument to prevent school choice because it is equalized my salary with everybody else's in New York City because I've sent my daughter to a private school. So now I have no money. I'm broke because of this. I pay money into this black hole of tax money in New York City, but I don't get to use the schools here because there's a lottery system. The people who watch this, and this is true when you work at the Free Press and you do stuff about kids, parenting, or schools, and people lose their minds because these are the hard things about life. You have a child and you're trying to figure out where she should go to school. You give all this money into, if I had the opportunity to not spend 50% of everything that I earn on a private school because I care about my child, I want her to have a good education, and I had that portable money, yes, I would use it. And yes, I would take it outside the district that I'm in because the district is terrible, right? That type of thing, us kind of libertarianish types love, because it's introducing competition into schools. Because the schools that don't have any competition are allowed to atrophy and provide terrible educations to kids for as long as they've been doing so in New York City. So.
And that's actually the kicker of my story. That's what one of the heads of the private schools said.
Well, that person is very smart, and that is now my favorite person in that story. Thank you, Frannie.
Thank you so
we'll look out
much.
for all the great stuff that you produce. And we'll be right back with Jay Solomon, who I think I refer to as the great Jay Solomon. He is great. And we're going to first look at a clip from a debate. It just went up yesterday.
It's so
Oh my God, it's
good,
so
you guys.
good. It's
really
like
good.
Ben
You
Hur.
have
It's
to
5
watch
hours
it.
long.
Watch it.
Have you watched it?
I've watched half of it, and it is so freaking good. Please go watch this. Barry Weiss
It
interview.
is Ben Shapiro,
Yes.
Barry Weiss, and Sam Harris on honestly debating who's worse for democracy, Trump or Harris. I was trying to watch this on the subway this morning. I take the subway because I'm like a normal person, and I do send my kid to private school. But I do take the subway, just so you know. I'm not like a fancy kid. But I was trying to watch this, and they were yelling at each other, and it was great. And it's up on YouTube X and at thefp.com, which you should go over to anyway and subscribe, you silly people. We'll be right back.
One of the questions, actually, that I have for Sam. So let's assume that everything that you're saying is true, right? Let's assume that Donald Trump is, a fascist and a threat to the republic and all this sort of stuff. So 48% of the American population is going to vote for him. Half the American population that votes in this election is going to vote for Donald Trump. What does that make them? You said earlier that you don't think that it's a good idea politically to label half of the American public that. But does it mean that anyone who supports Donald Trump in order to say, stop Kamala Harris, or because they like what he did as president, as opposed to Kamala Harris, does it make them fascists? Does it make them sort of the true threats to the Republic? How would you characterize those people?
Well, obviously there are different cohorts, right? I mean, there certainly are some fascists or aspiring fascists and actual Nazis in our society, and they are all in Trumpistan, right? So there are those people. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about those people, but
quick corrective: Nick Fuentes has apparently endorsed Kamala Harris. I'll just put that out there because Trump is too philo-Semitic for him. But yes,
well, we can double click on that, and it's not going to go well for your side of the argument. But we're both worried about anti-Semitism, and that we know it exists on the left and the right. But the really scary anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism that would give us, Timothy McVeigh style terrorism and violence in America, is on the right.
This is my original claim, Sam, is that Donald Trump is very obvious in his excesses. Democrats and the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris are much more, I would say, much more subtle in their excesses, but those excesses are no less dangerous for being more subtle. In fact, in some ways, I think they are more dangerous for being more subtle.
Ben, you can't use a phrase like no less dangerous. Hillary Clinton conceded in 24 hours. That is less dangerous than this continuous provocation.
Sam,
I just
disagree with you. I disagree with you. I think that the attempt by members of the media, by Hillary Clinton, who herself said that Donald Trump was illegitimately elected based on Russian interference in the 2016 election, was highly damaging.
How long did she say that for? How long did she say that for? Does she still say that?
I mean, she will. Yes, actually, she will still claim openly
that
there was manipulation that took place during that is true. There was manipulation during the 2016 election.
No, it's not. It's what? No, what she says. The sane thing to say is that there is continuous foreign interference in our elections, right? I mean,
that's the double standard, Sam. Now you're proposing a double standard.
No, but
when Hillary says it, it's totally subtle and fine, and when Trump says it in the most obvious, foolish way, then it's totally different.
Ben, you're just missing the relevant details.
All right.
So Jay Solomon, investigative reporter here at the Free Press, joins us now. Jay published a story on Sunday called "The Curious Case of Ariane Tabatabai" about a senior Pentagon official's transfer to a less sensitive role and the questions that this move raises about national security. Jay, thank you so much for being here. Your story is so good and so important, and it's also very clear about what we know and what we don't know, what we can confirm, what we can't confirm. Why don't you tell us what you found and the larger significance of this around these questions about Iran that you've been reporting on so well?
Well, I'd actually trace this back to 2023. If you remember, the Biden administration appointed Robert Malley as their special envoy. He was overseeing all negotiations with Iran in an attempt to kind of revive the Iran nuclear deal that the Trump administration killed. And Ariane Tabatabai was brought in as one of his negotiating partners. So that's kind of where the story begins. Malley then, in the spring of 2023, literally disappears. His security clearance is pulled. He starts to be investigated by the FBI. And then, in a very bizarre situation, some of his own information started appearing in Iranian state media. And people were trying to understand, okay, how did his stuff end up there? And the assumption is he got hacked by the Iranians and he had downloaded classified information, which then appeared in the Iranian state media. So Tabatabai was in that office, which obviously, given what happened to Malley, is now getting a lot of attention. But then she moved over to the Pentagon and actually got promoted to be the chief of staff in an office called Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict. It is one of the most sensitive jobs in the entire U.S. government because of her access to classified intel and understanding of everything that's going on as far as U.S. military operations in the world. Her shift, despite the focus on Malley, didn't get much attention until about a year ago. I got access, along with a 24/7 hour Farsi language television channel, to Iranian Foreign Ministry documents going back to about 2013. And in them, you can see the Iranian Foreign Ministry create something called the Iran Experts Initiative, which was essentially a grouping of overseas academics, think tankers in the US and Europe, who would kind of coordinate with them on promoting their positions on the nuclear deal, on on other national security issues. And Ariane Tabatabai was sort of one of the leading voices in that. And obviously, when I published these first articles, then when I was at Semaphore, it caused a shitstorm on Congress. They're like, how can someone who seems to be, cooperating with Iran on a foreign ministry kind of information operation, have such a sensitive job in the Pentagon? And for about a year, we could not get any real answers. They just, both on the Mali situation and the Tabatabai situation, the administration is totally stonewalled. But that brings us to today, where about 2 weeks ago, if you recall, there was a massive leak of U.S. classified intelligence that essentially was our assessment of how Israel was going to attack Iran. So it's extremely sensitive because, it potentially could have kneecapped Israel's operations because it was telegraphing to the Iranian side what happened. After that came out, there were some anonymous sources in Arab and Israeli media that was saying that Tabatabai was the main sort of suspect. I have to be total clarity on our side. We found nothing to back that up, and the Pentagon is totally denying it. But at the same time, I got tipped off about a week ago that Tabatabai had been shifted out of her job in this incredibly classified position to something essentially helping to oversee the mental health of troops and troop training, which is a significant, degradation in her access to classified intel. And again, it's another situation where the Biden administration and the Pentagon is just, they're not transparent. I tried for days to get clarification if she had indeed been moved, and they never answered. And then at around 3:00 on Friday, they planted a small piece in Politico's national security newsletter. As you know, Friday is kind of the death for any news stories. They planted at the very bottom of a Politico news story about this shift, and that's how this came to light. But now, again, there's a lot of questions like, well, why has she been moved? Was she really linked to the leak, or has she been totally absolved? We just don't know. But her movement is raising a lot more questions than answers.
But Jay, no one is explaining to you what is behind this or trying to come up with some reason for this. I mean, obviously, in diplomatic circles, if you have fallen afoul of somebody you end up becoming the ambassador to the Solomon Islands or something. This seems to be a similar thing with mental health of troops. I mean, that's a pretty precipitous fall when it comes to like your position. And also, I don't think you mentioned this in your piece, but you've mentioned it before, that her father is a law professor, political science professor at the University of Tehran. This is not a place known for employing dissidents who have kind of heterodox views of the Iranian regime. That would seem to raise a lot of red flags for me. I mean, when no one is responding to you and there's nobody inside the Pentagon that will say, yeah, look, we don't know what's happening, but we're investigating her. Are they even acknowledging that there's an investigation at hand with her?
Radio silence, nothing. I mean, when her role in the Iran Experts Initiative came out, her former boss, who was the Assistant Secretary for Special Operations, was testifying in Congress, and he said, we're going to look into, her security clearance. And then the Pentagon did put out some statements saying, we in these sensitive jobs, we always do kind of rolling reviews of people's intelligence and security backgrounds. I think what's hard with her is you don't want to condemn someone because what their family did, right? I mean, there are a lot of people who
of course
have jobs or family members in countries that shouldn't impact them. But what I could never get an answer to is the communications and her role in this Iran Experts Initiative. No one I talked to who served in the Pentagon, particularly in these classified jobs, understood how she could have gotten cleared.
Yeah.
And if she didn't divulge her role, how did she maintain her security clearance? Like, I could never get an answer from the Pentagon at all. And to be honest, even on the Robert Malley situation, they're still stonewalling. The Inspector General of the State Department put out a report a couple of weeks ago, which basically showed the State Department tried to cover up Malley's security breach. Like they tried to keep him in his job.
Yeah.
And then it got out, and then they had to remove him. So there's totally radio silence, and it's just the Iran issue is so important now. And as you know, the Iran kind of diplomacy with Iran, the nuclear deal, has been such a contentious issue going back to even to the Bush administration through Obama. And then you have these key players in this saga kind of just disappearing under very strange circumstances. Just makes the whole situation so much more unclear. And, we're still very much in a situation where the Iranians could be attacking Israel again, and there's going to have to be some Western response. And you have this whole circle of the Iran diplomatic national security kind of groupings, like totally in disarray.
Jay, one last question. I mean, maybe you don't want to answer this and feel free to decline, but what is your theory about why the Biden administration has tolerated this, how these people got clearance? They won't give you an answer, but do you have a theory, a working theory?
I think they're committed to negotiate diplomacy to end the Iran nuclear threat, or at least to manage it. They do not want conflict, which is understandable, but it's also kind of created this situation where Iran keeps moving forward with its military capabilities, its nuclear capabilities. So they brought in Malley because of his past ties, his role in Iranian diplomacy. So they wanted people who had these connections to some extent. But what my reporting from last year, particularly on this Iran Experts Initiative and Malley's own relationships to the regime, I don't think they totally saw the whole picture. And now that it's come out, it's so damaging and potentially, scandalous that they're just trying to certainly bury it until the election. That's my theory.
All right, Rob, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I said, Rob, I was calling you Rob Malley. You're Jay Solomon. I'm sorry. I'm so obsessed with this Iranian influence operation, and I'm accusing you now, Jay Solomon, of being part of it. Thank you so much, Jay, and we'll look forward to your future reporting on this. All right, it's time for a fun segment. No, hold on. That suggests that the other stuff has not been fun. It's very fun. I might be tired. I might have just called Jay Solomon Rob Malley. But first up, you guys probably have seen this if you're paying attention to this stuff, but this kind of crazy, insane moment on CNN between Mehdi Hasan, who for some reason has blocked me on Twitter, and conservative commentator Ryan Gurudzki. Is that how you pronounce his name? Gurudzki. All right, let's take a look at that.
Want to be called Nazis? Stop doing.
You're called an anti-Semite. You've been called an anti-Semite more than anyone else at this table.
Yeah.
And people will sit there and no, by me. I never called you an anti-Semite. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying I don't.
I'm a supporter of the Palestinians. So I'm used to it.
Yeah. I hope your beeper doesn't go off. The thing is
Did
that
you just say I should die?
You should not.
No,
Did you just say I should be killed?
No, I did not say that. I said, no, I did not say that.
Hold on.
Did your guest just say I should be killed on live TV?
I said I hope you don't.
Let me just stop.
You said you hope my beeper doesn't go off.
Because you said I'm a big supporter
of the Palestinians.
Hamas.
Guys, let me
stop.
Palestinians.
Are you?
Am I what? No, of course I'm not.
I apologize.
Are you a racist, violent person inciting violence against
Ryan?
That's disgusting.
That is completely.
I apologize.
That
Good job, CNN. Let's have first block say the Muslim guy should be blown up on TV.
What does that mean? Completely out of pocket. Is she paying for the rest of the joke? Completely out of line is what I think she means. He was promptly banned from CNN for the joke, which was kind of not surprising. But I don't know. I watch this clip and I get like heart palpitations, and it reminds me why I don't do hits on cable news anymore. It is just ridiculous, and this is a news story. Why is it a news story? Somebody made an offhanded joke, and yeah, it wasn't a good one. It seemed like a rather odd placement for the joke. What do you make of the tumult and the upset here in that Abby Phillips came back from that break in gravely intoned, but he is no longer on the panel, and we have neutralized this hideous monster, and he will never be on cable television or CNN again. What do you make of this? Bit of an overreaction, maybe?
People are pointing out the hypocrisy here of basically.
Mehdi Hasan's calling him a Nazi.
Mehdi Hasan calling him a Nazi, and everybody who supports Trump, and then Ryan makes a joke that Mehdi supports terrorists, right? That he has a beeper and he hopes it won't go off and kill him and presumably everybody at the table. and then he gets banned. What I think is so interesting about this is I think it's very clear that the other panelists didn't really get the joke. They just felt that somebody had attacked a brown person, on grounds
I'm
of
not sure I get the
terrorism or
joke,
whatever.
to be fair.
I think what he was saying is, I hope your pager doesn't go off, meaning like you support Hezbollah so much, you're such a defender of Hamas and Hezbollah that you have one of their pagers, and I hope it doesn't go off and kill you.
Of Hezbollah.
Exactly. It's a joke.
Right.
I mean, it's a joke. Okay,
Yeah.
but I think that they didn't quite you heard everyone go, oh wow.
Yeah,
and to me it's like they didn't actually understand it, but they knew that they were supposed to be outraged because their audience would be utterly outraged to see the Muslim person have a joke at his expense that ties him to terrorism.
Am I right in thinking and remembering that Abby Phillips did a thing to her phone later?
She did two.
She did two, and then she did one while she was on the air,
because Mehdi then
too.
left as well, and so she wanted to be clear that Mehdi is welcome back anytime, but Ryan is not. And to me, it was just so funny because...
Can Ryan apologize for this and come back?
No, he has been banned. He apologized on the air, by the way. He said, I'm sorry, it was
Mehdi Hassan, in his past, has said things about Jews, gay people, etc., when he was in a bit of an Islamist phase. He has repeatedly apologized for that. I take him at his word that he has moved on in his life and he has grown as a person. I don't suspect that people will, allow an apology from somebody else who made an offhanded joke. I think it's a bad joke. I think it's, inappropriate in its way, but you bring something up. This comes after Mehdi Hassan entered this conversation by flinging the word Nazi around. I couldn't really understand what he was saying because there was so much yelling back and forth because it's cable news, which is a useless institution these days. But yeah, that thing where you call everybody a Nazi, you're calling somebody then effectively a genocidal anti-Semite who wants to expand the borders of your country violently. That's what Nazism is, right? So why is that okay? I don't think it's okay, honestly, to call a guest like you're a terrorist. I mean, that's just a shitty thing to say. I don't like Mehdi Hassan. As I mentioned, he did block me, so I don't know why he did, but he blocked me on Twitter, and I'm sure he doesn't like me. But, keep some sense of decorum. But I do think that you're right about this, that the decorum is kind of unidirectional. There's a lot of decorum that other people don't really care much about. And it's allowed to go off and nobody really...
Right, and that's the sort of hypocrisy here is like they called, Trump supporters Nazis because obviously there's a racial component to that allegation. But if you said to them, no, if you said to them, well, that's racist, they would say, no, we call them Nazis because of what they say. So then Ryan, in a joke, accused Mehdi of supporting terrorists, right? Yes. And then suddenly, no, it's not because he has, defended the Palestinian line to the extent that someone could say he's defending Hamas. It's because of the racial thing, right? Yeah. So they want to kind of have it both ways.
I think the fainting couch, God, there are people collapsing all over this fainting couch. We need like a king-size fainting couch after, Tony Hinchcliffe and all this stuff. Everyone's losing their minds. All right, at the Washington Post, where everyone has been losing their minds for, 5 days now? The Washington Post's decision that was pushed by Jeff Bezos to not endorse either candidate in 2024 has led to an enormous outcry from their Democracy Dies in Darkness staff and readers. They have lost over 200,000 subscribers. I think that is actually more now. I think it was 250,000. That is an insane number of people that have
I didn't know they had that many subscribers.
Well, the LA Times... there was a big upset about the LA Times not endorsing for the first time. And then, by the way, it turns out, nobody's pointed this out, but it turns out that the owner's daughter said, well, yes, it was because Kamala Harris supports the genocide of Palestinians. And I was like, oh, that's different. Everyone's kind of quiet now. But a bunch of people quit. There was somebody over at the Washington Post, Jennifer Rubin, who was saying, well, why haven't you quit? This was before the Washington Post scandal. Yelling at people at the LA Times. Quit! You gotta quit. This is the moral thing to do. Her paper does the same thing. Guess who's still working at the Washington Post who hasn't quit? I'm gonna say this, and then I'm gonna kick it to you. I wanna see what you think of this editorial. I read this Jeff Bezos thing, and I was kind of impressed by it. I thought it was pretty good. The one thing about it that I don't think anyone noticed was that when they had somebody that took over the newsroom, and who was this British import, and there was all this kind of revolution in the newsroom. What is happening? Why are you firing these people that we love? And this British guy who comes in and at some point says, you know, no one is reading your stuff. Like, we're hemorrhaging readers, and you're talking about we have to keep the person I like as the person on top of this newsroom. No, they don't trust you. That's what Jeff Bezos then says after this. He writes an editorial for the paper that he owns and says, guys, the trust in journalism has always been around Congress, a little above Congress. It is now below Congress. Yeah. People trust journalists like, is it 8%, 9%, 11%? Something that is actually shocking. And he says, look, I don't want to endorse someone, not because I'm trying to curry favor. It's just people tend to think that we're on the other side. And I don't want to give that impression. So I think he's right about this, because nobody has ever been sitting on the fence about to pull that lever and said, Jesus Christ, I'm going to the Washington Post things. Grabs the paper and is like, oh, yeah, yes, I'm now going to vote for Kamala Harris. No one fucking cares what they think. No one has cared what they have thought for years. It is the enormous heads of journalists that think that, you know, we have to fact check this because America will collapse into a puddle of misinformation. It's like, yeah, no one's watching you. No one's reading your stuff, and no one is especially reading the editorial page in their endorsement. It hasn't moved anyone. It's an institution from a bygone era, and it doesn't need to be, and everyone should chill the fuck out. Sorry for swearing so much.
So I agree with you. I thought what he wrote was great. I wasn't so on board with him writing it, though. I mean, I'm very curious what you make of this. Like, yes, the Washington Post, along with LA Times and the New York Times and all of the mainstream liberal media have beclowned themselves. And I wrote a whole book about this, Bad News. Pick it up if it's
very
of
good
interest.
book, Brad. I like
Thank
that
you.
book a lot, yeah.
You know, about how the wokeness is a reflection of the class issues, you know, the people who work at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. These are people who went to elite Ivy League schools. They're totally out of touch with average Americans. They would die before they would, you know, break bread with the Trump voter. It's all true. And, you know, the media has only itself to blame for the fact that it's lost all this credibility. However, and I don't know if I've just been spoiled at the places that I've worked, but the idea of the owner stepping into editorial and saying, this is what we're going to do, we're going to endorse or we're not going to endorse, this is what I want to see in the pages or not. I mean, that does not feel right to me. I mean, I don't know if that's because I've been spoiled, but like that should be an editorial decision. And so is he now going to be like the editor-in-chief basically of the Washington Post? Is that the idea, that the owner now gets to say? I just felt very conflicted about it, because on the one hand, it's also so ironic, right? The media, along with, you know, President Obama and George Clooney and Nancy Pelosi, orchestrated this coup against Joe Biden to get Kamala Harris elected, and 3 months later realized, like, actually nobody's going to vote for her, right?
Correct.
So we can't even endorse this person who we pushed so hard. So there's a little bit of just desserts here, but I don't know, where are you on like the owner of a company stepping in and saying, this is the direction I want editorial to take?
So there's two things here. One is that you have somebody that's in the newsroom, and I don't know what is true here, who said before Bezos came out and wrote this piece that it was my decision. Somebody in there said that. And then Bezos kind of indicates in this piece that it was his decision. So we don't know. I mean, we're getting back to a period where you feel like William Randolph Hearst and people who are the big owners of media organizations that thumb the scale because they want to own media organizations because they want to own the debate. I don't think that's the case here with the Washington Post. What annoys me about this, though, is should Jeff Bezos have some influence over the direction of the company that he owns and puts a lot of money into? In 2023, the last number that I saw was the Washington Post was on track to lose $100 million, maybe more than that, but $100 million. And it is kind of funny that you have these people in high dudgeon saying, how dare he say this? It's like, he should just fund me and fund our sinking ship. We're losing money. And look, I think the Washington Post has some very, very good work. They have a lot of great journalists over there, and I would be very upset if it went away. I don't want it to. I mean, we criticize these people, but you know, we read them.
We want them to succeed. We want the New York Times to be good. We want it not to be terrible.
Yes, and I have a lot of people at the New York Times, and I see their byline. I really love them, and I think they do great work. But when someone is putting money into something, and there is a kind of egalitarian idea here, right? Well, he has so much. Who cares if he loses $100 million? And when he steps in and says, well, that's what they've lost, right? They've put a lot of money into this enterprise. He's done an incredible thing by all those subscriptions of integrating it with Amazon. You can subscribe on Amazon. They've done a really good job at doing the digital stuff. That was because of Jeff Bezos and Amazon. They put a lot of money into this and made that a better institution in a lot of ways. And when he comes in and says, I don't want to endorse, not saying, by the way, that we're giving her too easy of a ride, that we're giving Donald Trump too tough of a ride. We need to change that. Just this one thing, the act of an endorsement, I don't like. And people going on, like Robert Kagan going on to television, he was on, I think, CNN, saying, well, I don't have any evidence, because Aaron Burnett pushes back and says, do you have any evidence? He's a guy from, in case you don't know him, from the Washington Post. He's a columnist who resigned over this. And he said, I have no evidence that he's trying to curry favor with Donald Trump in the eventuality of a Donald Trump victory. But, and then you listen to him, he's like, he's very sure about it. It's like, we don't know that that's the case. These are people quitting their jobs based on what? Well, this endorsement, we should endorse. It is the biggest, and it shows one other big thing for me. It shows the inflation of the egos, how important they think their job is relative to everybody else in the world. They are the ones that are controlling. Democracy dies in darkness, and they're the one that is turning the light on. That's essentially what they're saying, right? And without us, like, I agree, without them, we'd be a poorer place, you know, information-wise, reporting-wise. But this idea
not
that
quite darkness, but
not quite darkness. It'd be a little dim,
a little dimmer.
A little dimmer. It's pretty bright out, actually. Just slightly put that dimmer. But I would say it's like they are like their estimation of their power and their influence is always amazingly overwrought and amazingly. It drives me crazy. So anyway, that's our show. And I'm done ranting. Do you want to see me rant more? Send me a text. I'll just give you a call and I can rant. I can keep going all day. But I want to thank Frannie Block, the great Frannie Block, who will be back again with us, and Jay Solomon for joining us. I mean, they're both Free Press columnists and reporters. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. And we'll be back tomorrow morning. Oh my God, I got to get up again with an excellent lineup, including Abigail Schreier, the great Coleman Hughes. I'm not saying Abigail's not great, but Coleman is great and Abigail's great. And our very own Duce Barry Weiss. And don't forget to join us live on election night. It's going to be very fun. Tuesday, November 5th. I shouldn't need to tell you that date. 7 p.m. We have an amazing lineup. A lot of that stuff is out on our social media. You can see all the people that are going to be on. And it's going to be a very fun time. And if you haven't already, and stop being an idiot, go to thefp.com and subscribe so you don't miss anything. And we'll see you next time, which is tomorrow.